Hey folks, in this episode I'm going to show you how to make this crumble effect in Blender using geometry nodes. It should be fairly straightforward to make, it shouldn't take too long, so without further ado, let's get to it. So I'm going to go into my scene, I'm going to delete the default cube, make sure that you're in geometry nodes over here. We'll then go to Edit, Preferences, and under System down here, click Allow Online Access, and then go to Get Extensions, and then type in Cell for Cell Fracture. Download the Cell Fracture and go to Add-ons and type in Cell for Cell Fracture and make sure that's enabled. The next add-on we're going to use will be the Node Wrangler, so search for Node and then just enable the Node Wrangler. Once you've downloaded and installed those two add-ons, click this button here, click Save Preferences, and that will ensure that the add-ons will load every time you load Blender. So the first thing we'll add into the scene will be the torus, so that's Shift A, go to Mesh, and we choose Torus. I'll take my cursor to the bottom left to this menu, and I'll expand that menu there. I'm going to set the minor radius to 0.5, and on the X rotation, I'm going to type in 90 degrees. I'll then hit numpad 1 to go into front view, and with the torus selected, I'm going to go over to my modifier tab over here. I'm going to click add modifier, we'll go to generate, and I'm going to choose subdivision surface. Maybe I'll set that to level 2. I'll then apply that modifier. Excellent. I'll then right click and I'll click Shade Auto Smooth. With the torus object selected, I'll then navigate to my material tab over here. I'll then add a material, so this should be my default material. I'll then click the plus button. I'm going to click New and add another material. I'm just going to collapse the surface on both of these. Excellent. Collapse the displacement, and under viewport display we'll expand these options, and for material 1 I'm going to choose maybe like a green colour, and for material 2 I'm just going to choose a cherry colour, something around there. This won't affect the rendering, this is literally just viewport, so both of these materials are still white on the surface. We'll change that a bit later. So I'll go back to my viewport shading, and with the torus object selected I'm going to click Object and we'll go Quick Effects and we'll choose Cell Fracture. Let me just drag this over here. So this source limit over here, this is the amount of times it's going to fracture. I'm going to fracture mine 200 times. Maybe if you've got a slower computer, stick to 100. Where it says material over here under mesh data, I'm going to click this button so it says 1. And what that does, it means that material 0, this one here, will be the outside material, and material 1 will be this material here, which will be the inside material. I'll then click OK. This might take a while. Just be patient. So this is my cell fracture torus. I'm going to take my cursor over here. I'm just going to increase the outliner, and this is the original torus, which should be a whole piece, and all the rest are fragments. So I'm going to select the first fragment. I'm going to scroll down all the way to the bottom. I'll then hold down Control, Shift, and select the bottom torus fragment. So that's all the torus fragments selected. I'll then click M for move, and we're going to add a collection, and I'm going to rename this collection to Like and Subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. You can name it to anything you like. I'll then click this button here, and that should move all these torus fragments into this Like and Subscribe collection. I'll just mute that collection. I'll select the original torus. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Empty, and I'm going to choose Single Arrow. If I go into Wireframe View, you should see that arrow there. Excellent. I'll just go back into viewport shading. I'm then going to select for torus. I'll just drag this up. I'm going to remove this auto smooth modifier here, which is a geometry nodes modifier. We don't need that on this one. And under your geometry nodes window here, so this should be set to geometry nodes, I'm going to click New. I'm going to zoom in. Maybe I'll decrease this window so we can see what we're doing in the geometry node editor. Delete the group input. I'm then going to drag this collection with all the torus fragments into the geometry node editor. I'll then mute that in my outliner, and with the collection info node, I'm going to click Separate Children. I'll then plug the instances into the geometry group output. Now we need to change the rotation of this torus object. So with the original torus selected, I'm going to go to Object Data, and on the X rotation, I'm going to type in 0. Excellent. I'm also going to click this pin button here. That will pin the geometry node, so if I select another object, it won't disappear. We're always going to have this appear here. I'll also drag this empty object from my outliner into the geometry nodes editor over here. We're going to keep the default settings, and we're going to use this empty object to affect the scaling and rotation of each of these fragments. So the first thing I want to tackle will be the scaling. So we go Shift A and we choose Instances and Scale Instances. I'm going to pop that in between there. So now if I just drag these, you can see what's happening. It's scaling each of the instances. If we didn't have Separate Children, it would scale it as a whole, but if we separate the children, then we can scale them individually. Let's just drag this over here. now I want to calculate where the empty is in relation to its rotation. In order to do that, I'm going to hit Shift A, type in position for position. Shift A, we go to Utilities, Vector, Vector Math. I'm going to set this to subtract, and we're going to subtract the original position to the location of the empty. I'll then hit Shift A, go to Utilities, Vector, and we choose Vector Rotate. We're going to change this to Euler, and we'll take this calculation into the top socket, and then we'll take the rotation from the empty into the bottom socket. I'll just box select all of these. I'm going to hit G, just drag them across. Take this vector math node here. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and we're going to change this to dot product. I'll then plug this into the top socket. I'll box select all of these. I'm going to hit G, drag them across. I'll then hit Shift A, go to Utilities. We'll choose Math and Math. I'm going to set this to subtract. I'm going to subtract it by -0.5. I'll then plug the value from the dot product into the top socket of the math node. I'll then plug this value into scale. So these coordinates on the dot product is X, Y and Z, and we want to be manipulating the Z component because the arrow is pointing upwards. And if I just drag this value up, you can see what's happening. So I'm going to set this value to 0.5. So if I select the empty object and I rotate it on the y-axis, you can see what's happening there. Is it currently inverted at the moment? Maybe if I rotate it on the z-axis by 180 degrees. There we go. It's pointing in the right direction. Excellent. I'll now select the torus object. So after the scale instances, I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to instances, and I'm going to select rotate instances, and I'll pop that in between the scale instance and the group output. I'll then hit Shift A, go to utilities, we'll go to vector and vector math. I'm going to change this from add to scale, and the scale value is going to come from this dot product, which goes into the scale, and we'll put the vector from the scale node into the rotation. Now we want to randomize the X, Y and Z vector coordinates here. So I'm going to hit Shift A, go to utilities and choose random value. I'm going to change this from float to vector, and for minimum X, Y and Z I'm going to type in -1, and for maximum we're going to leave that set to 1. I'll then plug this value into the vector of the scale node. Now I want to be able to change the fall off of the rotation, so I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to utilities, math, and we choose map range, and I'll pop that in between the dot product and the scale node. Excellent. So I'm going to set the scale max to, let's say, -2. I'm going to set the 2 max to TAU for tau, so that's 360 degrees in radians, and maybe I'll set the from minimum to 0.5. I'm going to click this pin button here to ensure that this geometry node tree stays intact. I'll then select my empty object, and I'm going to rotate it just to see what happens. Okay, it's scaling and they're rotating. I want to remove the fragments at the base. It should be easy enough. So we go into the subtract node, we're going to click clamp, and that will clamp it between 1 to 0, and maybe we can increase this number to, let's say, 0.25. so I'm going to set mine to -0.25. now I need to increase the scale a bit on the dot product node, so I'm just going to increase that to 0.75, I believe. 0.75. Yep, excellent. Hit numpad 1. So now with the empty object selected, we can now rotate this, and that's pretty much the effect that we're going for. I'll go down to the bottom right of my timeline. I'm going to set the end frame to 120 frames. I'll just increase this window. I'll zoom in, and on frame 1 with the empty object selected, under object data on the Y rotation, I'm going to set to 0 and add a keyframe there. I'll then skip to the last frame. I'm going to skip one more frame, so we're on frame 121, and I'm going to type in -360 for -360 degrees. I'll click this button here to add another keyframe. I'm going to hit T, and I'm going to change the interpolation type to linear. So now if I hit play, this is our animation. Excellent. I'll just skip back to frame 1, and with this empty object selected, it can do all types of stuff this, so it's pretty good. I'll hit G, and the effect will only happen in the direction of what the arrow is pointing. So I could point it in this direction, for example. Quite a good effect for a dissolve effect. I'm going to hit Control Z, and I'm just going to keep it as is. We'll just quickly go over to the shader editor. So I'm going to click this button here, change it from geometry node to shader editor, and with this object selected, I'm going to go over to my material data over here, and with material 1 I'm going to set as a green colour. Maybe I'll give it a full roughness. I'll just give it basic materials. For some reason, I've got a bit of a bug here. My second material isn't appearing in my shader editor. So what I'll do is under surface, I'm just going to change the colour here. I'm going to delete the default lamp, so I'm going to select the light and click delete, and I'm going to hit numpad 1 in my 3D viewport. I'll skip back to frame 1, I'll click period on my numpad just to ensure everything's centered. I'll then hit Control Alt numpad 0, and that will align my camera to the view. I'm going to select my camera, I'm going to go over to my object data over here. I'm going to set the X, Y and Z to 0, and maybe I'll bring it back on the Y axis by, let's say, 9 meters. Okay, and my camera is also rotated on the X by 90 degrees. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go light and add a point light. Let's just go into rendered view quick. I'm going to go to my world settings over here. I'm going to turn the color of the background to black and also set the strength to 0. So if you're having this problem where your second material isn't coming through, the reason is because of this like and subscribe collection. So I'm just going to re-enable that collection. I'm going to select the first fragment in that collection, and I'll select the second material in the slot, and I'll change this to a cherry color. I'll then mute that collection and all should be good. Should all be working fine. Excellent. So now I'll select the point light. I'm going to go to object data over here. I'm just going to drag it on the negative. I'll go to my light data over here. I'm going to set it to 50 watts, something around there. I'll go to object data. I'm going to drag it forward on the y-axis by maybe 2 meters. I'll go back to my light data over here, and I'm going to set the radius to 1 meter, something around there. I'm going to hit Shift D and duplicate that light. I'll go back to my object data over here, and I'll drag it on the y-axis by negative 3 meters, maybe something around there. I'll go back to my light data. I'll decrease the radius to, let's say, 0.25 meters, and maybe we can increase the brightness to 250 watts. Now with this torus object selected, just going to increase this window. I'm going to go to my material tab over here. I'll enable this collection with all the fragments in. I'll select the first fragment, and with the magenta selected, I'm going to change it to metallic with a roughness value of 0.333. I'll then mute that collection. Just going to go to my render settings over here. I'm going to change it to Eevee. I might add one more light into the scene. So the first point light, I'm actually going to change the color. So I'll go to my light data over here. I'm going to set it to like an orange color, and I'm going to increase the strength to maybe 500 watts. Maybe I'll increase the size to 2.5 meters. For this second lamp, the one in the front, I'm going to change it to a blue tone, something around there. Maybe I'll increase the strength to 500 watts. I'll then hit Shift A, go to light. I'm going to add another point light. I'm going to keep this one in the center, and I'll change this to 100 watts, something around there. So the only thing left to do is you go to your output, you choose an output folder location of your choice, click accept. Now I could render this out as an image sequence, but I'm going to render mine out as a movie clip. So I'll change it from PNG to FFmpeg, and I'll go to encoding and change it from Matroski to MPEG-4. We'll keep a video codec of H.264. Medium quality should be absolutely fine. I'll then hit Control F12, and that will render out the movie clip. That's all for now, folks. I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, please click like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.